My brother told me, 2 days before his company gala, that I would embarrass him if I walked through the door. My mother told me to be the bigger person and just let him have this, so I stayed home. But by Sunday morning his name was all over the Austin Business Journal, the Texas Tribune, and a clip on the local evening news that kept getting re-shared. And none of it was the kind of coverage he'd been chasing his entire adult life. I want to be clear about something before I tell you the rest of this. I'm not someone who sits around waiting for people to fail. I don't enjoy watching things come apart. But I also stopped pretending a long time ago that absorbing my family's cruelty quietly was some kind of personal virtue. There's a point where silent dignity stops being strength and starts being the thing that gives people permission to keep going. I hit that point the night of the dinner at Ember's Steakhouse, which is where this whole story actually begins. My name is Wren, I'm 29. For most of my adult life my family has described me to other people as the one who does something with computers. My brother Callum, 33, 6'1", the kind of guy who wears a sport coat to get coffee, is the one who does real estate development. He started his company, Sterling Point Development, 7 years ago with seed money from our parents and a tremendous amount of enthusiasm and very little else. By the time of the gala he had a polished website, a leased office in downtown Austin, and a reputation he'd built carefully through charity golf tournaments and LinkedIn posts about disrupting the commercial real estate market. Our parents thought he'd built an empire. Our mother introduced him at dinner parties by saying he had tens of millions in active projects. Our father, a retired insurance executive from suburban Columbus, Ohio, would say things like, "Callum just has that instinct, you know. You either have it or you don't." I did not have it, according to my father. I had data. I worked from home. I drove a 2018 Civic. I shopped at Costco and I wore jeans with no recognizable label on them, and my family read all of this as evidence of a life that hadn't quite come together yet. What they didn't know, what I had never told them, not once, not to a single person in that family, was that for the past 5 years I had been running a small, extremely focused investment fund. We analyzed distressed commercial real estate assets using proprietary risk models I'd built from scratch. We acquired positions in senior secured notes from over-leveraged developers, and we earned returns that most people would find difficult to believe from someone who drove a 2018 Civic. I kept my name off the letterhead. I didn't need the recognition. I had never needed it from anyone outside a term sheet. What I also hadn't told them was that, 18 months before the gala, I had become quietly and significantly invested in my brother's world specifically. Let me tell you about the dinner first. My parents called it a celebration. Callum's company had just announced a new mixed-use development on the east side of Austin, $40 million, 300 apartment units, ground floor retail, the full pitch. Our mother had made a reservation at the nicest steakhouse in Columbus, and she had flown Callum and his girlfriend Portia in just for the occasion. I drove up from my apartment, an hour and 15 minutes. Because my mother had made it sound important, and I still had not fully trained myself out of going places, because my mother made them sound important. Portia was 28. She was blonde in the specific way that costs money to maintain, and she wore what I later looked up and confirmed was a $1,400 blouse on a Tuesday night in Columbus, Ohio. She worked in what she called brand strategy, which appeared to mean she consulted for luxury businesses on their social media presence. She and Callum had been together 2 years. She had never, in those 2 years, asked me a single question about my work that wasn't prefaced by the word still, as in, are you still doing the data thing? Or are you still in that apartment? The still was always the whole point. It turned every answer into evidence of inertia. The dinner was cordial until the entrees arrived. That was when my mother reached over and straightened Portia's water glass for no reason, the way she does when she's bracing for something, and Callum set down his knife and gave me the look he'd been sitting on since we'd ordered. "I need to talk to you about the gala," he said. The gala was 2 weeks out. Sterling Point was hosting an investor appreciation event at the Ashford Grand in Austin. 500 guests, open bar, a keynote from Callum's business partner Reed, who was described to me as an extremely impressive person. I had seen the event mentioned in a group text 3 weeks earlier. I had not received an actual invitation. "I've been thinking about the guest list," Callum said very carefully, in the tone of someone who has rehearsed this. And I want to be honest with you, because I think that's the respectful thing. He paused. My investors are serious people. We're talking about family offices, private equity partners, people from Dallas and Houston who manage significant capital. The room is going to be full of folks who expect a certain level of professional. He made a small, helpless gesture toward the table, Polish. I put down my fork. You've worked hard, he continued. I know that. But your background is technical, it's back-end work, and I worry that in a room full of people asking about IRR and cap rates and fund structures, you're going to feel out of your depth. And that makes it harder for me to work the room if I'm also— He stopped himself there. If he was also managing me, if he was also explaining me. My mother set her hand on mine. He's not saying anything against you, he's just saying the crowd isn't really your crowd. Reed's bringing people up from New York, Portia added, as if that resolved it. I looked at my brother for a long moment. He met my eyes and then looked down at his plate, which told me everything I needed to know. He was not uncertain. He had decided this in advance, comfortably, and had come to this dinner to deliver the verdict with enough warmth layered over it that it might read as consideration rather than dismissal. I picked my fork back up. Okay, I said. Okay? My mother sounded simultaneously relieved and disappointed that there was no scene to contain. I'll stay home, I said, it's fine. I was not fine, but I was something more useful than fine. I was perfectly, completely calm. When the check came, I reached for it. My brother started to object the way men who think of themselves as providers object to a check being taken from them. I pulled the billfold toward me, opened it, and tucked in a card. It was a matte black charge card, the kind most experienced restaurant servers recognize on sight. Our server, a woman in her 40s who had been exceptional all evening, picked it up, glanced at it, and glanced at me. A small, quiet recalibration crossing her face before she walked to the terminal. Callum watched her go. He looked at the card reader. He looked at me. What card was that? He asked. Just a card, I said. The bill was $420. I added a 40% tip and signed without itemizing a single thing anyone had ordered. On the drive back to my apartment, I called my analyst Simone, who had been with my fund for 3 years and communicated almost entirely in efficient sentences and color-coded risk summaries. Full run on Sterling Point development, I said. Callum Ashby, everything. Already started when you told me about the dinner last week, she said. That's why she was irreplaceable. What Simone found over the next 72 hours was not entirely a surprise to me, but the specific shape of it was worse than I'd anticipated. Sterling Point's $40 million development announcement was, in actual fact, a $22 million project that had been described with inflated numbers across all of my brother's public marketing materials. More pressing, the capital structure was deeply troubled. Callum's company had taken on a mezzanine loan from a private lender, carrying terms he clearly hadn't understood when he'd signed them. The senior secured note on the underlying land was held by a fund I recognized without effort. It was one of our own portfolio positions. My brother had been making partial payments and was technically in default for 60 days. He either didn't know this or was hoping no one would look closely before the gala. Simone also flagged Reed, 41 years old, based in Dallas, 3 prior company formations, 1 successful exit that he mentioned in every public appearance, and 2 pending civil suits in Travis County that didn't surface in casual searches. Reed's current entity, the one he ran with my brother, had its registered address at a UPS store location in Plano. And in the prior 18 months, Reed had moved approximately $1.4 million out of Sterling Point's operating account into a secondary account registered to a holding company listing his brother-in-law as the sole officer. It wasn't my money, it was Callum's money and his investors' money. The gala was 11 days away. I'm going to be honest with you about the decision I made and why. I'm not telling this story to position myself as heroic, because I genuinely don't think I am. I'm telling it because for a long time I made myself very small in that family, and at some point you have to stop doing that. Not in a dramatic way, just in a quiet, final way. What I decided was, I was not going to warn my brother. Not because I wanted to watch him suffer, but because I had watched my family insulate him from the consequences of every choice he'd ever made for 33 years, and the very last thing he needed was another rescue from a source he didn't respect. What he needed was the wall, so I decided to let him find it. I booked the owner's suite at the Ashford Grand for the weekend of the gala. Here is the part I hadn't mentioned yet. 14 months before the gala, the property group that owned the Ashford Grand had run into severe liquidity problems following a construction overrun at a sister property in Houston. They needed a quiet capital injection fast. My fund structured a deal, bridge financing in exchange for a 22% equity stake in the Austin property, held through a Delaware LLC with a name that bore no resemblance to mine or anything connected to me publicly. I sat on the property management advisory board under that LLC's name. I had a permanent owner's suite on the top floor. I had been there twice, always quietly, always alone. The general manager was named Arthur. He was 51, former Four Seasons, unflappable in the particular way that only people who have managed genuinely catastrophic events can be. He knew who I was, his broader staff did not. I flew into Austin on a Friday afternoon. The weather was exactly that specific Austin spring perfection. Warm without being brutal, that clarity you understand immediately when you see it. Arthur met me at a private entrance and walked me up to the suite, which looked out across the pool and the grounds where the gala tent was already being erected below. Full buyout Saturday evening, correct? I said, looking at the white tent stakes being driven into the grass. Sterling Point Development, Arthur confirmed. The bride party. He paused, corrected himself smoothly. The hosting party, I should say, has had several calls this week about table placement and the lighting installation. I nodded. From where I stood, I could see the tent framing, the outdoor bar setup being assembled, strings of market lights being laced through the old live oaks. It was genuinely beautiful. It was going to be a very expensive evening for whoever ended up responsible for paying for it. I spent Friday quietly. I ordered dinner to the suite. I reviewed the complete read file Simone had assembled, including 2 editions. A source inside Sterling Point had confirmed that Reed had provided fabricated bank statements to 3 investors as proof of liquidity, and the SEC's Fort Worth regional office had received a detailed anonymous tip approximately 6 days prior. I did not know who had filed it, but I had my suspicions and they were not unflattering. The gala began at 7 Saturday evening. By 6:30 I was on my balcony with a glass of Willamette Valley Pinot Noir, watching the guests arrive below me. 500 people in cocktail attire, moving through the main entrance. The kind of crowd that wore its wealth on its wrists and its status in the volume and timing of its laughter. I saw my brother arrive with Portia at 7:14. He was in a charcoal suit I didn't recognize. Clearly new, probably purchased for tonight, specifically. He paused at the entrance before he was even inside it, working the arriving guests the way he'd always worked rooms, shaking hands, laughing with his whole body, performing certainty for an audience that he needed to believe in him. I sipped my wine and watched. Simone texted me at 8:11. 2 investors had left abruptly following a conversation with Reed near the bar. At 8:39 she sent a screenshot. A Dallas financial journalist who'd been at the event had posted a single tweet, hearing some interesting things about Sterling Point's capital structure tonight. Staying tuned. At 9:04 she called. The SEC made contact, she said. One of the investors was asked last week to preserve communications. He flagged Reed tonight in person to the agents. There are 2 of them downstairs. I set down the wine glass. Do you want to move? Simone asked. Not yet, I said. Give it 20 minutes. What happened in those 20 minutes? I watched through the event security feed that Arthur had routed to my tablet. Reed was pulled aside near the back bar. My brother, who had no idea what was happening, walked over to find out. I watched Reed say something to him, and I watched my brother's face change. Not all at once, but in increments, the way a face changes when information arrives that restructures everything a person thought they understood about their own situation. Callum stepped back. He looked around the room. 500 guests, a significant portion of them now watching the far corner of the tent where 2 men in dark suits were speaking quietly to his business partner. Portia appeared at his elbow. He said something to her. She picked up her clutch and walked toward the exit. I set down my tablet and put on my blazer. Arthur was waiting in the corridor when I came out of the suite. His posture was, as always, entirely composed. My brother, I said. Separately from Reed, the executive boardroom, please. Of course, he said. I took the private service elevator down to the administrative wing. The one my brother had never known existed, in the building he had rented for the evening, without knowing who owned it. The executive boardroom was glass-walled, used for property management meetings and, occasionally, exactly this type of conversation. I walked in. I sat at the head of the table. I set down a folder and waited. My brother came in 3 minutes later. Arthur had walked him down personally and he came through the door expecting a hotel manager, a PR person, possibly Reed. He stopped when he saw me. For a long moment he just stood there in the doorway of a room in a building he'd hired for the night, looking at his younger sister sitting at the head of the table. "What are you doing here?" he said. Not quite a question, more like a man who has just found the floor slightly lower than expected. "Sit down," I said. He sat down. He didn't say anything else. Outside the glass wall, the sound of the gala breaking apart was distant and muffled, like something happening underwater. "I need you to listen before you respond," I said. "Some of this is a lot and I'd rather you have the whole picture before we talk about what to do next." He looked at the folder on the table. "Is this about Reed?" "I've known about Reed for 11 days, I said. "But I need to start earlier than that." I placed my hands flat on the table. 18 months ago, my fund acquired a senior secured position in the land note on your Riverside project. We currently hold debt on the primary asset of your largest development. You have been in technical default for 60 days. I've been aware of this and have not called the note, because I was waiting to understand the full scope of Reed's involvement before I decided what to do. The color moved out of my brother's face steadily, like water draining. "Your fund," he said. "I run an investment fund," I said. "I have for 5 years. We focus on distressed commercial real estate debt. I know that's a lot to absorb right now, so just hold it, there's more." I slid the folder across the table. He opened it slowly, in the way you open something when part of you already understands what's inside. "That is a full audit of what Reed has moved out of Sterling Point's operating capital over the past 18 months, I said. Approximately $1.4 million into a controlled account. Fraudulent documentation provided to at least 3 of your investors. The SEC has been tipped. There are 2 agents downstairs who are going to want to speak with you before you leave tonight." I let that sit for a moment. The fraud was Reed's, not yours. "But you need an attorney tonight, not tomorrow morning." I pushed a card across the table. "She handles exactly this. She's been briefed and she's available. If you call her in the next hour, the next 72 hours get significantly more manageable. If you don't, they don't." My brother stared at the documents. He was very still. "The Ashford Grand," he said quietly. He looked up at me. "You own this?" "My fund holds a 22% equity stake," I said, "through a holding LLC." "You were here," he said, "this whole weekend." "I was on the balcony," I said. "It was a beautiful evening until about 9 o'clock. He pressed his hands flat on the table, and I could see him working through something. Not just the information, but what it meant that the information existed at all. What it meant that I had been sitting on it for 11 days, and had still driven to Columbus for that dinner, and sat through that conversation about professional polish and crowds not being my crowd. "Wren," he started. "I know what you said," I told him, and my voice was very even, because I had rehearsed this part too. "You said I'd embarrass you, that I didn't fit the room, that your investors were serious people who expected a certain caliber of guest and I wasn't that." I let it land. "I am one of your investors, Callum. My fund holds your debt. I understand IR and cap rates and fund structures at a level that very few people in that tent tonight could match, including Reed, especially Reed as it turns out." He looked at the table. He didn't have anything to say to that, which was unusual, because my brother had always had something to say. "I'm not telling you this to punish you," I said. "I'm telling you because you are my brother and you are about to walk into a federal inquiry without knowing what you're dealing with. And I would rather you walk in with the truth and a good attorney than without either. Call her. Cooperate. Tell them everything you know about Reed and nothing that isn't true. Don't try to shape the narrative. There is no narrative left to shape." I sat back slightly. "Your company doesn't have to go down with this. That depends entirely on the next 72 hours and the choices you make in them." He was quiet for a long time, long enough that I could hear distantly the sound of the caterers beginning to break down the bar service outside. Mom and Dad don't know any of this, he said. It wasn't a question. No one did, I said. Why didn't you ever say anything about the fund, about any of it? I thought about how to answer that honestly. 5 years ago at Christmas, I said. I tried to explain what I was building. You interrupted me to tell Dad about a land deal in Buda before I got through 2 sentences, and I made a decision that night that I didn't need you to know, that I would build it anyway without the acknowledgement, and I did. The silence between us was different from our usual silences. Something had shifted in its texture. The attorney, I said finally, tonight, not tomorrow. He picked up the card. He nodded once, and then looked at me for a moment longer than he normally would. The kind of look that means a person is seeing something they hadn't been looking for. I stood, smoothed the front of my blazer, picked up my folder and walked to the door. Arthur was waiting in the corridor. He walked me back to the private elevator without a word, which is the mark of someone truly excellent at their job. I rode up to the suite. I changed out of the blazer. I poured the last of the Pinot Noir and carried it out to the balcony. Austin at night below me, that specific Texas abundance of light, broad and generous and sprawling in every direction like the city, had never decided where to stop. Down on the grounds the catering staff was already moving the first tables. The tent would come down overnight. Whatever my brother built next would be built on something real, or it wouldn't be built at all. That part belonged to him. Before I went inside, I pulled up Simone's number and sent her a message. Attorney engaged, we hold the note. No action needed, for now, she replied in under a minute. Copy, well handled. I finished my glass. There's something my family never understood about me, and I don't think they understood it even after that weekend. They thought I was quiet because I had nothing to say. They thought I drove a Civic because I couldn't afford better. They thought I worked from home in the dark because I had failed to find my way into the rooms where things happened. I was quiet because I was paying attention. I drove the Civic because I had better uses for the money. And the room where things happened, the room with the actual power in it, the one where the decisions were made, I had been building that room for 5 years, one position at a time, and I had built it so solidly that when my family finally stumbled into it, they didn't even recognize what they were standing in. You don't have to announce a thing to make it real, you just have to do the work. And you have to be willing to let the work speak, when it's finally time for it to speak, in a voice much quieter and more permanent than anything you could have said out loud. The city lights held steady. The night air was warm. I stayed on the balcony for a long time and I did not feel the need to be anywhere else.